Around the World with the Richard and Judy Book Club, exclusive to WHSmith.
And in this edition, things are grinding to a halt.
But there were those who would later claim to have recognized the disaster before the rest of us did. These were the night workers, the graveyard shifters, the stockers of shelves and the loaders of ships.
Well, we all know that the world turns, but what would happen if it started to slow down? We've been taking a look at The Age of Miracles by Thompson Walker.
And that means it's time to turn the page on another of this summer's titles.
Discover more about your favourite authors with the Richard and Judy Book Club.
We hope you're enjoying this book club summer collection and that you're making the most of the extra content and great offers you can get online and in store when you buy at WHSmith.
And before we start grilling this week's author, let's hear from you about what got you turning those pages this week.
I'm currently reading a book by Raymond D. Feast. It's called At the Gates of Darkness, and it's a science fiction fantasy. So it's got loads of magicians and dragons and trolls and elves and all sorts in it. Enjoy it immensely.
From the Richard and Judy Book Club, I'd like to read Between a Mother and Her Child by Elizabeth Noble, because it seems to be a book which is similar to The Lovely Bones, which I really, really loved, and I loved the film as well. But with this book, it's about this 18-year-old boy who dies in the tsunami, and it's about what happens between his parents afterwards. And because I have a daughter myself, I think it's kind of one of those books you would never want that to happen to you. So I think it's a book that I would probably get engrossed in.
I'd probably have a look at Double Cross by Ben McIntyre. World Wars, true story, could be quite interesting.
Well, let's talk about The Age of Miracles, this extraordinary book by Thompson Walker. Karen's here now, and it's her birthday. Happy birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Very appropriate. Yeah. This is an extraordinary high-concept novel. It's a really interesting, threatening, challenging idea that underpins it. Quite simply, that the Earth, spinning on its axis as it has done since it was created, is beginning to slow down. Now, we'll get into what that actually means for those of us living on the planet in a second, but how did that concept dawn on you, that it might be possible for the spin of the Earth to slow, the slowing, you call it in the book?
Right. You know, I got the idea from something that actually really did happen on a much
Please
smaller
tell me that's not
true. I mean, it sort of scared me when I read it, but this was back in 2004. You know, the earthquake that caused the tsunami in Indonesia. I read that it was so powerful that it actually did affect the rotation of the planet by a tiny amount. So after that, our 24-hour days were a fraction of a second shorter.
An atomic clock would kind of clock
Yes,
that.
We wouldn't notice it. But still, even though it was a very small amount, I found it really stunning. You know, something that I think we all sort of take for granted as sort of the definition of certainty, that the sun will rise and set at predictable times.
And by the way, because I'm completely ignorant of this, is the tsunami effect still happening? Is it ongoing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it doesn't just correct itself, but then there are other things slightly affecting the speed of the rotation all the time, because over the course of, millennia, the Earth is actually slowing down, so it's always slightly adjusting.
Well, in The Age of Miracles, it's a lot more than that, and you don't need an atomic clock to spot it. And what I love about the opening of the book is you bring on the catastrophe quite quickly. The first thing you write is that shift workers notice that the dawn's a bit late in coming, and people going out to work late in the day thinking, well, surely it should be dark by now, but it's still light. But it's only a few minutes, and then the governments of the world get together and simultaneously make the announcement. Just tell us what they say. How do they tell the planet that it's slowing down?
Well, it's right at the beginning, and I just tried to imagine other big news that we have received in the real world. So it's initially sort of the scientists having a press conference. I mean, that's the initial moment when everyone finds out that the sort of first big amount is that the rotation of the Earth has slowed, so that by an hour. So the days are about 25 hours.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very, if you like, a womanly slant on it. I mean, if this was on TV, if it was a film, you'd expect someone like Will Smith to be kind of leading the charge to save the world. In fact, you see it through the eyes of a 14-year-old girl growing up in California, enduring her parents' shaky marriage and her own first adolescent tremblings of love. Why did you decide on Julia?
Yeah, I was interested. I mean, I've always sort of been drawn to these kinds of disaster stories, but I was interested in doing one from a little bit that would be a little bit different, less like some of the sort of Hollywood versions where you're with, the President of the United States and you're with, like you said, Will Smith. But Julia, from the very beginning, I had this feeling that maybe it would be a way to tell this big global story in a way that would feel intimate and personal, and I hoped in that sense real. There was something kind of natural about telling the story from the perspective of technically a grown woman, but looking back in very close detail on these traumatic events of her childhood. And then Julia I based her a little on myself at that age. I mean, she's not exactly me, but I certainly gave her some of my...
Well, you always do that with your first novel, don't you? There's always some of you in your heroine, definitely.
You get into the collective psyche really well, I think, because of course, as a reader, I found this all the way through the book, particularly in the opening chapters. You identify with people and you think, well, how would I react? What would I do? How would I try to protect my family? And people have very different reactions, but quite a few of them, being sort of Californian and used to fixing things, whether it's an earthquake, or a great brush fire or whatever, you fix things in California, which is where you're from. They kind of feel this urge to sort of do something. And of course, there's nothing to be done. Right. And so they head for the hills, many of them. They all clear off and go into the mountains and take bottled water and camping gas.
Right. At the very beginning.
At the beginning,
That
was very clever, I thought, to put people in that kind of blind panic. They think they're doing something sensible, but it's ridiculous. It's a stupid thing to do.
Yeah. Well, I liked the idea of trying to... It seemed realistic to me that... even though this particular calamity is something that affects the entire planet, so there really is no way to escape it, I thought it seemed realistic that people might still have that gut instinct to flee,
Yes.
And then sort of later in the book, in a way, which I hope is realistic, people start to become accustomed to this bizarre news, and as things get worse, they sort of manage to settle into a new normal and sort of proceed with some of their rituals that and daily sort of habits.
But it can only, I'm not going to give the ending of the book away at all, but thinking about this, because the Earth continues to slow, it can only end in one way, can't it?
Well...
There's only one exit strategy here, and that's oblivion.
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely... I liked the idea of writing about, especially as I got into the book, about writing about human beings living with a kind of radical uncertainty, and what would that be like for people and ordinary people. So that was what was on my mind, and I certainly did not want to have some sort of magical solution at the end, because it just seemed like that wouldn't be
that wouldn't be start speeding up again.
Right, but I did. I thought for a long time about what's the right sort of note to end on, and I hoped that there was sort of a element of, the book is about uncertainty all the way through, and the ending, there's a little bit of uncertainty that I hope has a way of, it's certainly scary, but it also allows for a little hope, and it's sort of...
We were having a heated debate in the cab coming here about what actually, in the end, would happen if the Earth slowed right down, but stopped people, and gravity would get much heavier, wouldn't it?
Well, yes, because the G-force wouldn't throw us off as much.
And we'd all get much heavier, and we'd get shorter, and we become like troglodytes, on the
I didn't think about the height,
but you see, you're not a science fiction writer, but you write very tellingly about, in these early days, birds losing the ability to fly with the accuracy that they did, because everything's changed, all the physics and the dynamics are changing, and aircraft fly differently as the Earth slows down, all of that. Where did you get that information from? Because it would never have crossed my mind.
Oh, well, I'm glad that you found it convincing. That was one of the challenges of the book.
No, seriously, I did. It was very convincing.
I guess on the one hand, I felt a certain amount of liberty with this premise, because nobody is expecting the rotation of the Earth to slow down so suddenly by such a large amount. So it's not like there's a whole body of scientific research, on this exact. Of course, there's scientists who, could probably, they could make predictions, but I felt I had a certain sort of space for my imagination. So some of that I just
made up.
Yeah, made up, or it seemed logical based on what I did know, and then I did do also a lot of research, especially on the physics, and eventually I showed it to an astrophysicist who sort of...
Would you like to hear my theory about what would happen when the Earth finally stopped?
Yeah, I would love to.
Because I have been thinking a lot about this.
Okay.
You see, I figure what would happen is the Earth would finally come to a crunch, that's it. It's not rotating, although of course it's still going around the sun. So one side is in permanent light, and it gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and the other side's in total darkness when it's freezing. But there would be this habitable line this kind of dusk line between the two.
Oh.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
didn't occur to you?
Maybe that's my next
Maybe
novel.
that's
The
what I
Dusk
thought.
Line.
The dusk. I'll give you the title, The Dusk Line, or The Line at Dusk. You can use
yeah.
either. I don't mind. It's all right. But basically, it's a very narrow, temperate area where crops can be grown. But of course, only a very few people can go and live. So who would decide who lived there? How would that happen?
Yeah,
There we go.
that sounds great.
That sounds like the Hunger Games.
It's a little like, I suppose so.
Yeah, yeah.
But I just thought I'd throw that in.
And it would always be a little bit dusky. Yeah.
Just before we finish, I'm really interested in this particular list, our summer list. We have a record number of first-time authors, of which you, of course, are one. And you did. I'm interested also in how many of you have done creative writing courses and have obviously succeeded through that. Did you find it a big help?
Yeah, I definitely found it a big help. I know there's sort of a lot of discussion about, whether it makes sense to do creative writing courses or sort of what it means about writing. But I feel in the end it's not so different from what writers have always been doing. It's just a little more formalized, because the best thing about it is meeting other writers and getting a chance to sort of exchange work, I think, the way that writers always have, and meet mentors, and so it was really useful.
And did you ever talk about this book when you were on your writing course? Had it occurred to you then?
I wrote a short story version of it when I was in school.
So you kind of got feedback on the short story from your other students.
Yeah. Although in the end, what was probably the most important for this particular story was I set it aside for a couple of years, and that was after I was already out of school that I came back to it. And I'd been working in publishing, so maybe I had learned something by studying other people's books about long form structure and
you were an editor, weren't you?
That's right. Yeah. Suddenly, when I came back to this story, I had the feeling that maybe it could be a novel. So that was when I started it.
It's hard to categorise it in terms of a genre. I mean, I'd loosely call it. It's from the what if genre. What if such and such would have happened?
Yeah.
Is that a genre you'll continue with? Will your next book be a what if book?
Yes, it will be. I like that term too, because it doesn't sort of. There's a lot of different ways you could describe it, but what if gets at it. Start with sort of a what if this happened question, and then it's fun to follow it out.
It gives you a certain freedom, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In your imagination.
So can you give us a clue about what the content of the next one is?
Yeah, I mean, it feels I'm in a little bit of the early stage where if I say it too much out loud,
I
somehow feel like it will, as if it will disappear. But
you don't have to answer. It's fine. I don't want to kill the book now.
It is another story. It is another what if story, and it's another story about ordinary people facing a very extreme situation.
Great.
But it's a different
Well, if it's
kind.
half as good as this, it will be a great success.
Oh, thank you so much.
Did you know you were writing a bestseller when you wrote it? No, seriously. Did you think this could be a bestseller? This?
No, because maybe partly because I was working in publishing, I knew how hard it is to publish a book at all.
It's random,
much
isn't it?
less get it. Yeah. So I certainly. It wasn't. I mean, it's been a sort of shocking and wonderful surprise.
Well, many congratulations on a fabulous debut.
Thank
really
you.
is. Yeah,
Thank
it's
you so
book.
much.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, well, the idea of the world stopping turning. I mean, we've read about time travel, going back in time, going forward in time, whatever, very Doctor Who. But if the world actually stopped turning, which is the premise of this book, what would happen?
She isn't a sort of a scientist or even a science fiction writer, but her grip on the immediate consequences of the Earth slowly slowing down, so that, say, a day of daylight lasted for 26 hours and a night time would last 26 hours as well, are quite complex. I mean, for example, because we're spinning at a constant rate, the Earth is, as it were, trying to throw us off the surface of the planet. But we're kept here by gravity. We're in constant tension between G-force, throwing us off as the Earth turns, and gravity, which keeps us stuck to the surface. But if the G-force were to lessen because the Earth slowed down, we'd weigh more. We'd be more stickable to the surface of the planet, and that would affect the way we moved and the way we felt. But it would also affect things like the flight of birds. Their delicate calculations of how they get from a tree branch to a windowsill would alter, and that happens in the book. They crash into buildings, and even pilots report that they're finding difficulty now landing their planes because the dynamics of living on the planet are changing. But the main thing, of course, is the light, and therefore the heat during the day, which goes up, and the coldness in these extended nights, which goes down.
Yeah, but I mean, she doesn't write it like a science fiction writer.
Not at all.
I mean, it's not like seeing one of these huge blockbusters, on the screen of the world coming to an end.
No, she consciously avoided that,
She
didn't
consciously avoided that, and what she does is she writes it from a very human angle. She writes it from the point of view of a 14-year-old girl growing up in California, Julia, and she everybody begins to notice, first of all, the nights are longer, the days are shorter, everything is slowing down. And basically, it kind of mirrors her own adolescent obsession. She's very worried about her parents, their marriage is beginning to disintegrate, her grandfather's got some weird obsessions, and of course, age 14, she has her own adolescent love interests. So it's all seen from a very ordinary human point of view, not a science fiction superhero point of view.
No, but I do think that the slowing, as people on the Earth call this phenomenon, is also a metaphor for the powerlessness of adolescence, particularly early adolescence, because of course there's nothing that anybody can do about this. The governments may make speeches, presidents give bulletins as to how much more the Earth slowed down in the last 2 weeks, but there is absolutely nothing that humanity can do to stop the process. It's not like even tentative attempts to predict an earthquake or deal with the aftermath of a tsunami. This is an unstoppable event, which clearly can only have one ending, which is the extinction of life on Earth. We never get there in the book. She leaves the ending open without saying any more than that. But it's perfectly clear that this is the end of everything that we think we know. Anyway, it's a marvellous read and a real high-concept novel. One of those what-if stories, which I personally love. The slowing down of time and the subsequent effects on life, it has to be a tough one to research, I'm sure. So how exactly did Karen get on with turning back the hands of time? Here's her answers to some of our quick-fire questions.
I always loved to write, even as a child. And then I wrote sort of little stories all the way, all the way through childhood. And then when I got to university, I really started to think about fiction in a really serious way. And I took a couple of creative writing classes and met some other young writers. And that was really sort of the beginning of when I got very serious about trying to figure out sort of how to tell a story this way. I was working full-time as an editor while I wrote The Age of Miracles, and it was very challenging to find the time. I mean, that was the main difficulty. But certainly also, right when I started, it was also hard to sort of spend all my time, or a lot of my time, editing other people's novels, and I also edited nonfiction. But I feel like I also really learned a lot from that process. Learning what other people in other books were doing well and what needed work, and learning to spot those things. What makes for a really great sentence, what makes for a really compelling story, a complete character. All those lessons I was learning as an editor, I tried to sort of take home and apply to my own novel. I think growing up in California had a sort of an effect on why I ended up writing this novel about a disaster. At first, I set the book in California because it was just very, sort of convenient for me that I could use all these details I remembered from my own childhood. But the further I got, the more I realized that I think growing up in California left me with this sense of what it's like to live with catastrophe, especially the idea of catastrophe and the threat of it, earthquakes, brush fires. And I think as an adult, what I've realized is what's more interesting than all the times when, in my childhood, sometimes there would be earthquakes, or once there were 2 earthquakes in one day, and I remember everyone ran to the store to make sure they had enough supplies because an expert on television said that there was a 50% chance that the big one, the big earthquake that scientists think will sometime strike California, there was a 50% chance that it was going to happen in the next 24 hours. So that was a really memorable and scary day of my childhood. Of course, the big one didn't come then. But as an adult, the more I think about it, I think what's maybe more interesting and more profound about being a Californian is that is how much you adapt to that kind of uncertainty. Most days in California, you're not thinking about earthquakes and you're not worried about it. And I think there's actually something just very human about that. We all live with uncertainty, and all of our lives could change in an instant, but we don't think that way. And I think there's something kind of moving and endearing and just true about. It's just true of human beings that we actually are capable of adapting to a lot of uncertainty. I like to read novels that have sort of a what if premise, and really any book that has both great writing and a really compelling story is likely to sort of pull me in. Some of my favorite books are Blindness by Jose Saramago, The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides, and The Road by Cormac McCarthy.
I close my eyes.
Close your mouth while you're at it.
What is it, I say? It's The woman takes a deep breath. It's your baby. I stare at her. What do you mean? She hesitates. She's alive.
Close My Eyes by Sophie Mackenzie. Next up in the Richard and Judy Book Club.
Watch exclusive videos with our authors on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/officialrichardjudy.